Yo, it's Elut, and I'm back. I'm talking about Branded again. It's been a while since the first deck profile, and I've been trying a lot of things, and I want to talk about them. So I'm kind of going to give two takes on the build here because I do like both versions of Branded that I'm playing. There's really like one main change between the two, and then like some tiny things change around it. I'll get into it in a bit. But yeah, let's not waste time. So easy stuff. 3 Fallen of Valbaz. I do think you still should run 3. It's nice to know that you're not going to run out for your normal fusion things, and it's nice to just have a free one to send to the grave for Quem effects or possibly Cartesia summons or what have you. It's just a good card to have all around, and it's not the worst normal summon going second a lot of the time. It's not always the best play, but it's definitely not bad. And this one might be weird to some people. 2 Aluber instead of 3. I thought I was crazy for this like a few weeks ago, but recently I've been seeing a few people trying this out too, and I actually like it. What I was trying for a bit was 3 Aluber, and then I took out the Tragedy. And I didn't like that so much, but I've really been enjoying 2 Aluber, 1 Tragedy, and 1 Adlib. I guess I'll put them here now. I still like the Adlib. I just think he's a fun play with Branded in red, and it's really easy to get him into the grave with Crane Guignol. So I still think it's worth playing. I think it's really fun. But the reason I don't really like the 3 Aluber so much is, 1, I don't necessarily want to hard draw him all the time, because if your only option is to just normal Aluber and you get impermed, that's like your entire play. like if that is your main line to get to Branded Fusion, like you might be in trouble anyway. That's like the weakest line to get to it. I'd much rather open Branded Opening, or possibly have a way to send like Retribution and Branded Fusion to the grave and get it that way, like through Albion the Shrouded Dragon or Bestial Serenir or something like that. So I don't want to clog the whole deck with normal summons. I still think he's a good card and everything, but I don't necessarily like want to reserve my normal summon for him all the time, and I've been liking 2. And then the Tragedy, I was starting to think I didn't really need the Tragedy or didn't want it, but I do, because I started playing Gold Sark again along with Foolish Burial, and this can be a target for both of those, which is nice. So not only do I not have to run 3 Aluber because I don't have to hard draw it for a normal summon necessarily, but drawing the Gold Sark or the Foolish is kind of like drawing an Aluber if I really need him that bad. Like if I don't have another way to get to Branded Fusion. So I kind of like that, actually. Still on the 1 Quem and 2 Cartesia. I think this ratio is the way to go. I tried for a short period, like 2 Aluber, 2 Quem, but I just don't like it. I think it's too many like normal summons, and Quem is good, but I don't feel like I need Quem on every end board either. It's kind of weird. Like it's about 50-50 whether that's like what I want. But there's also so many ways to get Quem on the board too. Like you could search it through Tragedy. You could Branded Opening for Quem. You could send Titaniclad to the grave and then on end phase summon Quem. Or if you're playing the Nadir package, you send Lulu, does the same thing. So I don't think you need 2 Quem. Personally, not a fan of 2 Quem, but 1 is great. And then the 1-ofs, Albion, of course, love that card. The 1 Merc, Springin's Kit, I'm back on the kit, actually, believe it or not. Part of the reason why I wanted to cut Aluber to 2 is because Kit kind of does a similar thing, but also Kit can be a free special summon, depending on a couple things. It doesn't necessarily have to be your normal summon. And I just like Kit. The thing I like to do with Kit the most, besides just getting like a branded spell that I really need, is recurring the Retribution from Banished, and then either shuffling that back in or having it in my hand to pitch so that I can recur other spells from the grave. And it's kind of fun. A lot of times I'll side Kit out in like game 2 and or 3, But I like the card a lot, actually. So I started playing it again, and I've been enjoying it. Dark Magician, because we love Dragoon, and the 2 Bestials, pretty much the same as always. Yeah, that's it. I don't think I have to say too much more about those guys. All pretty self-explanatory. I will talk about Duality a little bit. I kind of wanted to there, but I'll get to that in a little bit as well. But the obvious stuff: 3 fusion, 3 opening, 3 deployment, pretty standard. And then what I've been really enjoying in this deck, in the main deck, is 3 Book of Moon. Book of Moon is a very interesting card because, you know, it's such a simple effect. It's a staple, it's a classic, but I feel like it's so useful going first and second. If you're going second, sometimes just like face downing like a negate monster on the board can be nice. You know, you avoid some things that way. But more importantly, it also protects some of your guys from things like Imperm or Veilers. Because if you only have the option to normal Aliber, let's say, to get your branded fusion, and you don't have deployment or Cartesia in your hand to protect it from those sort of targeted negates, then Book of Moon on the Aliber, or Book of Moon sometimes on Albaz, like going second if you're going for a fusion play, can really help with those kind of cards, which is really cool. And then if you have it and you're going first, you can just set it, and it's basically a floodgate trap hole, which already messes up a lot of decks. It messes up Ixie's decks, Link decks, Synchro decks. I just think it's a very helpful card in this deck. I'll talk about that card as well more when I start talking about Duality. Then the branded one-ofs, the Retribution. I'm back on High Spirits. So High Spirits, from what I gather, is usually in builds where you're playing Nadir Servant, and you send Sprint and get the kit, and then kit gets you High Spirits. But honestly, I just feel like this card is useful sometimes. If you're sort of unsure what to do, sometimes, like with your hand, but you have High Spirits, a lot of times you can just like pitch an Albaz in your hand and grab a Cartesia or something like that, or a kit or whatever, and it's kind of helpful because you send like your Albion from the extra deck, so you already have like a Branded in Red or a Retribution to set at the end phase. And I feel like this is like kind of a nice cycle card in a way, but also this recurring itself back to your hand if a fusion was sent to your grave, similar to Cartesia, is really nice, because then you have another card in your hand either to play or to pitch for Dragoon or an Albaz fusion on your opponent's turn or whatever. I just think it's kind of a nice card. And then the 1 red and the 1 Lost. Lost is crazy. I don't really have to go through that. And Branded in Red is also pretty crazy. I love that card quite a bit. So that is it for those. And then, of course, we play the Called By because Ash Blossom is cringe. The Foolish I've been playing, and I brought back the Gold Sark. I think if you are playing 1 Mercurier and you're not playing the Tragedy, I really don't think you need the Gold Sark for anything, because the only thing you'd be banishing is the Merc. But if you're playing Tragedy and at least 1 Merc, I think you should play Gold Sark. I just think it helps for consistency and things like that. It's just a nice card. And then, so I've been trying so many things with this deck. I've tried cutting the deck down to 40 cards, and overall I actually didn't like it, because when you're playing a deck with all these like weird searchable 1-ofs, it's kind of okay to go a little over 40. This is a 42 card main deck, by the way, because by having like a few more cards over 40, you slightly reduce your chances of opening all these weird 1-ofs at once. And I've also been trying Crossout with Nadir Servant, and I've been trying them separately. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that you really should kind of do one or the other. So the build that I've personally still preferred after all this time is the 3 Crossout with 2 Ash and 2 Imperm. I just feel like this deck is all gas a lot of the time. And if you're running Crossout and Nadir, that's also fine. I think it can be a little bit bricky. My problem with Nadir Servant is you have to kind of go all in with the Nadir build if you really want it to be impactful. And I'll talk about what that entails in a little bit. I'll probably do that next because this is the end of the main deck. But I feel like Crossout is good going first or going second, and protecting your best card is still just worth it in the end. And I just... It's kind of nice to just have some generic hand traps in the main deck anyways. Like, if you draw one, like, it's not bad. They're just generically good cards against a lot of decks. So, I'm still on Crossout. And some people say Crossout's bricky, but I feel like with Branded, like, there are so many effects where you have to pitch a card anyway. So if you draw 2 Crossout and you have, like, an opener in your hand, you can just use the other Crossout as, like, your Lubellian pitch or something like that, or whatever, or like a Dragoon Negate pitch or something. It's like I really don't feel that way about this deck, at least in the way that I've currently built it. It doesn't feel bricky to me, especially with things like Foolish and Gold Sark and all that stuff. There are a lot of ways to get to the cards that you need, and I still really like the Crossout. So yeah, that is the main deck. I guess I really want to talk about Nadir Servant and stuff. So I guess I'll do that. So the alternate version of this deck entails a couple things. I think if you are playing the Nadir package, I do think you should be playing Dogmatica Maximus. If you don't know what this card does, basically the plan is with Nadir Servant, you send something from your extra deck to your grave. In the Nadir build, I've been playing Garura in the main deck, so that you send this, you get the free draw of Garura, and then you add Maximus from Nadir Servant to your hand. Then what Maximus does is from your hand, you banish whatever extra deck monster you just sent, and you special Maximus to the field. Then you activate the effect. This sends 2 more extra deck monsters from your extra deck to the grave, and your opponent has to do the same. And a lot of times that would be cards like Albion, that would be cards like possibly Titaniclad. And in the Nadir build, if you're running Nadir, I really think you should run Lulu. I don't see why you wouldn't. But in the Crossout version of the deck, I don't run Lulu, or Garura for that matter. But I think you should run them if you're doing Nadir. The problem is with that, especially in things like the Mirror Match, but other decks as well, like telling your opponent to send extra deck cards to their grave sometimes can really backfire hard on you, and that can be pretty scary. So that's why I don't always feel comfortable like doing this blind as like my main plan if Branded Fusion doesn't go well. I think the combos that come with Nadir Servant are really interesting. I think they're really cool, and I like this card. But I feel like if you're not playing Maximus, and you're just playing Nadir and you send like a Lulu or a Titaniclad or whatever, and you get Quem on the board during end phase, and you have like kind of nothing else on the board because Branded Fusion didn't resolve, that's just straight up not enough a lot of the time. I don't think you win many games that way. I think you really need to send like the extra one off of Maximus and get like a lot of things going, and then, you know, maybe you can swing it that way. So I think if you're doing Nadir, you should go all in, but just, you know, be warned that it can backfire on you pretty hard. Another thing with Nadir that I found out I really don't like is this card sucks going second. Like, it straight up just sucks going second. And that's pretty bad. Whereas, like I said, Crossout is just good either way. And it's such a helpful card. The utility is kind of insane. So that's something else to note too. Personally, I do like both builds. I think both builds are very interesting. But I still, in my heart of hearts, I do prefer the Crossout version. And then the other thing I want to talk about is Duality. I got 3 copies of Duality. This card is so cool. It's so cool. But I'm not running it in the main deck for the Crossout build. I think if you're running the Nadir build, you have more of a reason to run this card. Reason being is, if you don't know how this card works, it's basically a light-dark duality type of thing. That's why it's called Duality. But basically how it works is you take a light monster or a dark monster on your side of the field, and when you play this card, you tribute that card for cost, and then you special summon from your deck or extra deck a monster with the opposite attribute, but with the same level and the same type. So, as an example, you could take a card like Albion the Branded Dragon. Let's say your Branded Fusion goes through, and you make Albion, you activate its effect, and someone imperms, but you have Duality in your hand. You can play Duality and tribute Albion, which is a dark level 8 dragon. This goes to the grave, which is where you want Albion to be anyways, usually. And you cheat out Sanctifier, which is a level 8 dragon light monster. So that's how Duality works. And that can be cool for dodging things, like your imperms, like your veilers. But the main application for it, in my opinion, is Granguignol. Granguignol is a level 8 light spellcaster, and you contribute it off of Duality to make a level 8 dark spellcaster, being Dragoon. And I do think that is worth mentioning. I think that is really cool. But the reason I'm not super sold on Duality if I'm playing like the Crossout build is because Duality is one of those cards that like it's not a consistency card, it's not a starter card, it's like a hardcore extender card. So if you draw, like, let's say, and then this card is not searchable, by the way, so you're probably playing it at 2 or 3. Which means if you draw it, or let's say maybe even you draw 2 of it, and you don't have any of, like, your really important starters, or maybe you have one starter that gets interrupted somehow, Duality is doing fuck all in your hand, and that feels really bad. But the reason I feel like Duality is much more worth it in a Nadir build is Dogmatica Maximus is also a light level 8 spellcaster. So this is another way to cheat out Dragoon. You can just set Duality if you did the Nadir play, because you're locked out of the extra deck. And then during the draw phase of your opponent's turn, you tribute this off Duality, you make Dragoon. So something to mention as well. I don't love this card. I think it's very intriguing. I think it's really cool. But I feel like it does things that are kind of awkward. So, for example, if you're tributing the Albion to dodge like a Veiler or an Imperm, and you make Sanctifier, that's great. You still get the fuse off Albion, and you have Sanctifier on the board. Awesome, right? But at the same time, that means this is already in the grave, which is technically where you want it for the end phase. You want this in the grave. But that means if you're playing something like the Bestial Lubellion, you probably don't have Branded Lost up on the board either. So there's like a weird sort of thing with that, and it's like, yeah, I would rather, tribute this and still get the fuse off, generally speaking, than to leave it there and get impermed. But it is kind of awkward. Things like that are just awkward. There's no other word for it. It's just kind of weird. But the thing about Duality that I feel like sometimes is also a little bit redundant is, since I'm playing Book of Moon now, you can Book of Moon things like your Alibur, things like your Cartesia if necessary, or your Albaz. You can Book of Moon your Albion, and they can all still do their effects. Duality, in this deck, you can Duality the Albion, but you can't Duality all your starter cards, like your starter main deck cards. So it doesn't really help you there. The only other cool thing about Duality that I will mention is it has a shuffle back effect. So if this is in your graveyard, and you can do this the same turn that you sent it there, or you played it, or whatever, you can banish this card and then shuffle back a light monster and a dark monster in your grave back to the decks. And then you draw a card. And that's really cool. But I do notice too, on like a turn 1, if I use a Duality, a lot of times the things that I want to shuffle back, I don't always want to shuffle back. Like, for example, if I have a Granguignol and an Albion in the grave, that's a light and a dark. I can shuffle back both of them and draw a card. That's great. I wouldn't mind shuffling back the Granguignol, but I don't really want to shuffle back the Albion because I want it to be in the grave to get that card on the end phase. So it's just, I don't know. This card's just kind of weird to me, and I don't know that I'm convinced that it always does enough. I don't think it's as consistent as I would like it to be. If it was searchable and I could play it at 1, I would probably just play it like without a second thought. I think if you're doing a Nadir build, I think you should play this card with Maximus and things. But if you're playing a more Crossout oriented build, I don't think it is necessary by any means. But yeah, sorry for the long rant. There's a lot I wanted to talk about. I've been trying out a lot of things. So yeah, here's the extra deck for the Crossout build. So we have the 2 Albion, 1 Lubellion, only need 1, and the 2 Mirror Jade. Pretty standard stuff. This shouldn't surprise anybody. The 1 Sanctifier, and we are no longer playing the Gimmick Puppet, but Sanctifier is just already so good. It's good for bringing back, like, on a turn 3 sometimes. Like, sometimes you can steal your opponent's boss monsters if you, like, Dark Rollered and cleared their board and then make Albion. You just steal back, like, one of their big boys. That can be pretty fun. As well as it just, like, setting up fusion plays for yourself on your opponent's turn, or just saving you from evenly matched. I think all that is already pretty helpful. I'm just kind of bored of the Gimmick Puppet thing. I hope that card gets banned. This shit is stupid. It was funny for a bit, but it's pretty fucked up, honestly. But I don't want them to ban this. I think this card is so cool. The Rindbrum for the Grave effect, as well as, you know, occasionally I'll summon him, and he can be pretty helpful for some things. But the Grave effect is goated. The Titaniclad for searching Quem, occasionally for summoning an Albaz, you never know. Or adding to hand. You can also add to hand. We are playing the Sprind. Sprind is for the generic applications that I talked about in the first video. Just being able to fuse with a special summoned effect monster that was summoned this turn is always pretty nice. And if it gets sent to the grave and, you know, something happens to your Mirror Jade, you can, you know, special summon an Albaz on your end phase and make another one, potentially. Same with Queritus. Speaking of which, we're playing 1 Granguignol and 1 Queritus. I still think Queritus is cool. Against some decks, you can, you know, just keep them from attacking. That can be nice. But even beyond that, if he gets destroyed by a card effect, that's an Albaz special summon. And sometimes, if you bait a negate with his attack effect, and they negate and destroy him, then they probably used like one of the few negates they have, likely, which means an Albaz is coming out, and if you have a card in your hand, they probably don't have anything to answer for it. So that alone, I think, is still worth playing. And then the 1 Granguignol, this card's just great. It's just great to set up like Branded in Red and stuff. And I've seen some people running it at 2. I don't think that's necessary, personally. I feel like the extra deck is already so tight, I don't think you need to. I'm still playing the Masquerade. I love this card, man. I've talked about it before, but I just love this card so much. I think it's so cool. And then the Dragostapelia. I brought him back, dude. This guy is cracked. I thought he was boring at first, but when I took him out, I was like, I feel like I'm missing something a little bit. And then I brought him back, and I'm like, nah, this guy's goated. This guy's fucking goated. You make him off Branded in Red if you're not going for a Chimera play. And then you can, you know, if you have like the ad-lib set up, you banish the ad-lib and the Mirror Jade, make a Predaplant. Ad-lib brings back the Mirror Jade. You have another banish, and you have a negate. And not only is this a negate, but the thing that's so crazy about this is that if you put a Predator counter on a monster that your opponent controls, it negates the effects while Predaplant is on the field. But if Predaplant is off the field, it no longer negates their effects, but they are stuck at level 1. Which absolutely ruins Ixies and Synchro decks. And it's so mean, and I fucking love this card. I will never take him out again. He's too good, dude. I was underrating him so hard. Chimera for the Branded in Red play. Of course, you know, we like the pops. And Dragoon. We love Dragoon. Dragoon is awesome. I don't think you should take him out, dude. He's so fun. He's so good. Just the fact that he can't be targeted, similar to Sanctifier, is already so crazy. But having a hard negate when you have all these other like removal disruptions and things it's a nice mix of effects that you have at your disposal. And then for the Nadir build, the things I would change is I run the Garura for the Nadir play. I send this card off of Nadir so that you get a free draw, and then you search Maximus and do all that other stuff like I was saying. And I think if you're playing Nadir, you should play Lulu. I'm like kind of out of the frame, I apologize. You should play Lulu if you're doing Nadir Servant. If you're not playing Nadir Servant, I don't think this card is that great. Because you don't... The only way you can send it is off Grand Yugioh. Because you can't send it off Mirror Jade or anything like that. I think that's the only way. It would just be Grand Yugioh. And honestly, with Grand Yugioh, I'm normally sending something else in the Crossout build. Like I'm sending an Ad-lib. Occasionally, I'll send the Dark Magician if I have like a specific play in mind. Or if, you know, I'm down real bad, I'd rather send Albion or Titaniclad over Lulu. So, I cut this from the Crossout build, but if you're playing Nadir, you absolutely should play this card. The things I would swap out for the Nadir build, I think I took out the Sprind for the Nadir build. And then I think I took out... I might have taken out Titaniclad. I think I might have done that. Simply because Titaniclad and Lulu do a similar thing. But you could very easily play both. That's really up to you. But yeah, that's... I'm like rambling a lot today, so I hope I'm being super clear and helpful without, you know, just ranting about nothing. And then the side deck, some side deck options. One thing I've found really funny is Triple Tactics Talent. And currently it's in the side along with a Zeus because I just have the space for it. I think if you're playing Nadir, you could probably just main deck Triple Tac. You could maybe main deck Triple Tac in the Crossout build as well. Because this becomes like your main go-to after you get ashed on a branded fusion. Because that means you either draw 2, you shuffle back something in your opponent's hand, or you take control of a monster. And I feel like if you're playing Triple Tac, you should have a Zeus in there somewhere. Because if you're playing an Ixies deck and you know you're going second and you try to make a play, gets interrupted somehow, especially against a deck like Kashtira, like dude, just take the fucking Arise Heart or something, attack with it, make a Zeus, clear the board. That could be pretty funny. You know what I mean? So I think that's fun. You could absolutely main deck this, but I think if you are main decking Triple Tech, you should have Zeus in the extra deck. But that's just a fun thing. The more important side deck cards that I've really been consistently using are, I'm still on the Dark Roller. This is more matchup dependent than anything else, but I think generally speaking, Branded has an okay time breaking boards if they're not interrupted. So Dark Roller is actually pretty good. Cosmic Cyclone, I don't think I need 3. I think 2 is generally enough. There are other pop effects that Branded has, things like Guardian Chimera. But this is specifically for like the Runic Fountains and things like that. If you get rid of those cards, I don't know that you necessarily need like the Invader of Darkness and all that sort of stuff. I have that card, you know, I was playing with it a little bit, but I think this is honestly fine. And then we have the 3 Evenlies. Depending on the matchup, I might side in Evenly and Dark Roller. It just kind of depends, but usually it's like one or the other. Again, it's matchup dependent, but Evenly is pretty crazy. If they have a lot of monster negates, you probably want Dark Ruler more. If they're doing like a lot of back row, then you probably just want Evenly. But they're big blowout cards. And then the last one that I've been playing a good bit of recently is There Can Only Be One. And this card is massively cringe. I know that. But in Branded, this basically does not affect Branded nearly as much as like so many other decks. So because this card, it says you can only control 1 monster of each type, Branded is like totally fine with that. Like they don't care. Because if you look at, you know, a lot of decks use cards that are mostly the same type, you know, like Sword Soul, you got your worms, Cyber Dragons, it's all machines. Heroes are like warriors, generally speaking. They might have a fiend in there somewhere. But it's mostly warriors, and like that ruins so many decks. But the thing with Branded is if you think about in Branded like your typical end boards, like you might have like your Mirror Jade, you might have your let me see, you might have like your Bestial Lubellion, you might have a Grand Guignol on field or something like that, or a Quem. Let's just put Grand Guignol or something like that. You have a Dragon, a Worm, and a Spellcaster. If you have Dragoon instead, that's a Spellcaster. If you have Sanctifier instead, that's a Dragon. So it doesn't really affect your end boards that much. And even if you summon other stuff while this card is up, it usually doesn't affect you too much, because Despian Queritus is a fiend, and Masquerade is a fiend, Sprind is a machine, Predaplant is a plant, Rindbrum is a winged beast. So like, this card messes up so many decks and barely affects you at all. So it's something to side in going first, and it's a really mean card. But there are worse things out there, let's be honest. There are more cringe cards in this game, like the Gimmick Puppet. But yeah, that's about it. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about for today. I know it was a lot. This was probably longer than you expected for a deck profile. But there was a lot of things that I'd been experimenting with and a lot of things I wanted to talk about. So let me know if you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Take care. Peace out.